For centuries, it was believed that the Roman Empire and the Chinese Empire were two completely separate worlds, divided by thousands of kilometers, different cultures, and languages impossible to understand between them. Two giants that flourished at opposite ends of the map, as if destiny never intended for them to meet. And yet, deep within the archives of history, traces exist. Scattered, disconnected, forgotten evidence. Roman coins buried in Chinese soil. Ancient texts describing distant empires with disconcerting accuracy. And a thread, almost invisible, that connected these two powers across time, silk. What you are about to discover today is not just a story of trade between civilizations. It is a story of curiosity, of espionage, of silent admiration. And of an unexpected bond that challenges everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. Did the Roman Empire and the Chinese Empire ever really know each other? Or were they like two travelers in the night, crossing paths without ever seeing one another? Stay until the end, because what you are about to uncover will not only surprise you. It will make you question how much of our history remains hidden, waiting to be revealed. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel. Here, the past speaks again. During the 1st century BCE, the world known to each civilization was as vast as it was mysterious. Rome dominated Europe and North Africa with an iron authority, building roads, subjugating peoples, and raising cities that still stand today. At the far end of the Eurasian continent, the Han dynasty ruled with equal splendor, cultivating administrative, technological, and philosophical sophistication that made it the undisputed power of the Far East. What separated these two empires was not only geographic distance, but a series of natural and human barriers that seemed insurmountable. Between them stretched mountain ranges like the Hindu Kush, relentless deserts like the Taklamakan, and a succession of warrior peoples, from the Parthians to the Xiongnu, each jealous of their role as intermediaries between the two worlds. And yet, both empires were expanding in disturbingly similar directions. Rome advanced toward Asia Minor and the Near East, while China pushed its borders westward, exploring the edges of Central Asia. Slowly, like two rivers born in different mountains but running toward the same ocean, their paths began to converge. There was no shared map, no permanent ambassadors, no formal agreements between Rome and China. But there were rumors. Distant echoes of a powerful empire beyond the horizon. Merchants spoke of monumental cities, organized armies, luxurious goods that could not be produced by any known civilization. Each empire began to glimpse, albeit vaguely, the outline of the other. As indirect trade began to flourish along land and sea routes, a silent question settled at both ends of the world: who were these men on the other side? And how much could our lives change if we ever came to know them? For the Romans, China was not a country with its own name. It was a distant, exotic, almost mythological concept. They called it Ceres, a confusing term derived from the word they used for silk, the mysterious fabric that arrived from the farthest east of the known world. The earliest references to this place appear in passing, in the works of poets and writers such as Virgil, Horace, and Pliny the Elder. They described a people living beyond deserts, beyond mountains, in a territory so remote that it seemed unreachable even for the most powerful empire of the West. Pliny, in his Natural History, was fascinated yet troubled by the excesses of Roman society. He pointed out with concern how tons of gold left the empire's coffers each year to purchase exotic goods from the East, including silk, that fine, almost translucent fabric that became a symbol of luxury and decadence. To Pliny, this garment, which revealed more than it covered, was a threat to Roman morals, but also a sign of deep commercial dependence on an invisible supplier. In reality, the Romans did not know for certain where this marvel came from. Some believed it was a plant product, extracted from trees. Others thought insects wove it, though they could not imagine how. What was certain is that silk arrived through Persian, Parthian, Arab, or Indian hands, yet its origin remained a mystery. For centuries, Roman geographers could only speculate. They described distant lands with mountains of jade and rivers of milk. Some adventurers claimed to have reached the land of the wise, where justice was balanced and laws firm, though no one could confirm whether they spoke of China, India, or merely a legend. Even in later centuries, when the Roman Empire transformed into the Byzantine Empire, knowledge remained vague. Some Eastern Byzantine historians, like Cosmas Indicopleustes, a 6th-century navigator, began documenting more precise trade routes, describing the land of the East as a real place, inhabited by just men, where cloves and precious fabrics were exchanged as offerings. Yet even then, the image of China remained more fantasy than reality. The truth is that Rome longed to know that world. It yearned for it. And at its eastern borders, from Syria to Egypt, merchants and governors knew that beyond the dunes and mountain passes lay an inexhaustible source of wealth and wonder. To reach it, however, Rome still had to break the invisible walls separating it from the East. While Rome dreamed of the secrets of the East, in the distant court of the Han, echoes of a majestic Western Empire were also beginning to emerge. Unlike the Romans, Chinese chroniclers were meticulous and detailed. They recorded with almost obsessive precision everything their envoys and merchants learned about the outside world. And that's how the idea of de Qin was born. That was the name the ancient Chinese gave to the Roman Empire. They conceived it as a kind of distant reflection of themselves, an empire equally powerful, just, and cultured, but located at the far end of the known world. They did not see it as a threat, but rather as a parallel civilization. Contemporary documents, such as the Ho Han Shu, described de Qin as a land where men were tall and fair-skinned, where cities were vast, laws were firm, and luxury goods were abundant. They spoke of stone palaces, a large sea called the Mediterranean, and a floating bridge crossing a wide river, likely the Euphrates, at the eastern border of the Roman world. Chinese accounts also included descriptions of Alexandria, its streets, its harbor, and even the famous lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Although the information came through intermediaries, Chinese chroniclers collected each detail like pieces of a puzzle, trying to understand what this civilization was like, a civilization that seemed to share with them greatness and sophistication, yet existed beyond their maps. Even in later periods, well into the Middle Ages, books of the Tang dynasty recounted how the Arabs besieged the Byzantine capital and forced the emperor to pay tribute. These texts spoke of Constantinople with awe, mentioning its granite walls, water clocks, and medical practices, such as trepanation to remove parasites from the brain. To Chinese eyes, Byzantine medicine was as advanced as it was strange. It is astonishing to think that, without ever meeting face to face, 2 civilizations so distant imagined each other with such richness of detail. And although much of the information was often incomplete or shrouded in mystery, one truth was clear: Rome and China recognized each other as equals. Not as enemies. Not as conquerors. But as mirror empires, separated by the world, yet united by history. Although Rome and China never signed a treaty or exchanged ambassadors regularly, a far stronger and more constant bond emerged between them: trade. And that bond was woven, literally, with threads of silk. Silk was the beating heart of a trade network that crossed deserts, mountains, oases, and seas. It was not just a fabric, it was a symbol of status, luxury, and power. In Rome, wearing silk meant showing the world that you had reached the social pinnacle. In China, exporting it meant projecting their refinement beyond their borders. This mutual desire gave rise to one of the most important trade routes in history, the Silk Road. A labyrinth of overland paths and maritime routes connecting the Far East with the Mediterranean, though rarely directly. Between the 2 empires, the true masters were the intermediaries, the Parthians, Sogdians, Persians, and Kushans. These peoples acted as custodians and gatekeepers. They not only transported goods but also controlled information. In many cases, they decided which truths reached one side or the other, and which mysteries remained in the shadows. Rome could never trade directly with China, at least not on a sustained basis. But that did not prevent Roman markets from being flooded with Eastern products: silk, porcelain, spices, precious stones. At the same time, Roman goods reached Asia: Alexandrian glassware, northern amber, emperor medallions, carpets embroidered with gold thread, and a peculiar textile called sea silk, made from the filaments of Mediterranean fan mussels. In the Chinese city of Yinchuan, for example, a 3rd century Roman silver plaque was found depicting the god Dionysus reclining on a feline. And in an ancient port of present-day Vietnam, coins of emperors Marcus Aurelius and Antoninus Pius were discovered. Each object found is silent evidence that goods traveled farther than most imagined. Most surprising is that this trade network did not depend on the will of emperors, but on merchants, navigators, and adventurers who risked everything to carry precious cargo beyond the horizon. The Silk Road was not a single highway. It was a shared dream between civilizations that never saw each other but learned to depend on one another. For centuries, China had jealously guarded one of the most valuable technological secrets of antiquity, the art of silk production. It was not merely an economic matter, it was almost a state affair. Silk was not simply a product, it was a symbol of power, a cultural emblem, a diplomatic tool, and a source of wealth that no other people knew how to replicate. Until one day, the secret was stolen. It was the 6th century, and in the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Justinian I ruled, determined to restore Rome's greatness and consolidate his economic power. Chinese silks reached Constantinople at exorbitant prices, filtered through Persian and Arab hands, which kept most of the profit. Justinian knew that if he could break this monopoly, the commercial balance between East and West would change forever. It was then that 2 enigmatic figures appeared, 2 Nestorian Christian monks who, under the guise of missionaries, had managed to travel to China. During their stay, they closely observed the process, the rearing of silkworms, the harvesting of cocoons, spinning, dyeing, and transforming this living fiber into an ethereal cloth. Upon their return, they carried more than memories. Inside the hollow of their bamboo canes, they hid silkworm eggs and small mulberry shoots. They carried no rolls of fabric, no maps, no treaties, they carried the very essence of a secret. Once in Byzantium, the eggs hatched. The worms grew. And for the first time in history, the West produced its own silk. The impact was immediate and transformative. Constantinople, Antioch, Beirut, and other Byzantine cities began to develop a powerful textile industry, carefully regulated by laws determining who could wear silk, in which colors, and on what occasions. Imperial purple, dyed on silk, became a symbol reserved solely for the emperor. Byzantine silk began to conquer European markets, gradually displacing Persian silk and competing directly with Chinese silk. But not everything was gain. This act was also, in a way, an economic blow to China. Although the quality of its silk remained unmatched, the monopoly had ended. For the first time, the greatest technological secret of the Far East no longer belonged only to the East. It was one of the quietest heists in history. No armies, no armed spies, no blood. Just 2 men, 2 hollow canes, and the fall of a wall that had separated 2 worlds for centuries. For centuries, the relationship between Rome and China seemed limited to trade. And yet, some more intimate, human traces began to emerge from the dust of tombs and genetic archives. In 2010, in an ancient Roman tomb in northern Italy, archaeologists recovered a skeleton with an unusual feature: its mitochondrial DNA, inherited maternally, revealed an East Asian origin. In other words, the mother of this person had Chinese ancestry. More than 8,000 kilometers away, in the heart of the Roman Empire, lay the body of an individual with roots far from the Mediterranean. Who was this person? How did their mother end up there? Were they descendants of merchants, migrants, or slaves? The answers remain unclear, but the implications are profound. Years later, in the Southwark neighborhood in the heart of London, the ancient Roman Londinium, 3 more skeletons were found. Forensic analyses suggested physical traits similar to Asian populations, possibly of Chinese or Central Asian origin. Although forensic science cannot confirm it with certainty, the discovery sparked a wave of questions among historians. Were there truly individuals from the Far East living within the Roman Empire? The opposite has also been investigated. In the remote village of Liqian, in China's Gansu province, some current inhabitants display physical traits unusual for the country: light eyes, prominent noses, unusual height. For years, this fueled the legend that they descended from Roman soldiers captured after the disastrous Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE and sent by the Parthians to guard the eastern borders. Although genetic tests have yielded contradictory results, and archaeology has yet to provide conclusive evidence, the myth persists. And with it, the idea that contacts between Romans and Chinese were not merely commercial, but also deeply human. Perhaps we will never know for sure who crossed which frontier first. But every Roman coin found in China, every piece of Egyptian glass buried in Central Asia, every skeleton with mixed genes, reminds us that history does not move only through treaties and battles. It also moves through skin, blood, and the anonymous lives that connected worlds before maps recognized them. In 1941, the American sinologist Homer Dubs shook the academic world with a proposal as fascinating as it was controversial: the possibility that a small group of Roman soldiers had founded a village on Chinese territory. The hypothesis arose from a combination of historical texts and geostrategic assumptions. Dubs relied on an ancient Chinese account describing how a group of foreign warriors, captured by the Parthians, was sent eastward after the Roman defeat at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE. According to the account, these prisoners fought in a strange military formation resembling fish scales, which could refer to the famous Roman testudo, a defensive formation of interlocked shields. Dubs argued that these soldiers, forced to serve as auxiliary forces on the eastern borders of the Parthian Empire, could have reached what is now China's Gansu province. There, he suggested, they would have established a small settlement that centuries later became known as Liqian. The idea of a lost Roman colony in China ignited the imagination of researchers, local governments, and even tour operators. For years, genetic studies attempted to support the theory. In 2005, some tests revealed that certain Liqian inhabitants showed Eurasian genetic traits, which many interpreted as potential Roman heritage. But later, in 2007, broader analyses concluded that most of the current population shares common genetic profiles with northern Chinese populations, without a clear connection to Europe. Moreover, no archaeological remains confirming a Roman presence have been found in Liqian: no coins, no pottery, no weapons, no structures with traces of Latin architecture. The hypothesis, therefore, rests more on desire than evidence. And yet, something persists. Because there are stories that survive not by being confirmed, but by what they represent. The idea that a group of Roman soldiers, defeated, disoriented, and exiled, could have crossed all of Asia only to end up founding a town in China. It is a living metaphor of how the paths of history do not always follow official routes. Perhaps we will never know whether Liqian was or wasn't a Roman colony. But the mere fact that the question exists already tells us something. The ancient world was more complex, more connected, and more unpredictable than we ever imagined. At first glance, it might seem that contact between Rome and China was scarce, scattered, even accidental. But when we look more closely at the traces left by centuries of indirect trade, technological espionage, and mutual curiosity, a powerful truth emerges: although these empires never faced each other on the battlefield nor signed official alliances, their mutual influence left marks that survived for millennia. Silk was far more than a commodity. It was a symbol of luxury, a sign of power, an aesthetic obsession that transformed the fashion of an entire civilization. In Rome, silk tunics were not just garments, they were social banners. They represented status, wealth, access to the unattainable. And over time, that fascination crossed oceans and centuries, spreading from Europe to its colonies in the Americas. Every time a lady of the Spanish or French court wore silk in the 17th century, she carried an echo of that ancient connection with the East. But it wasn't just silk. The Romans also exported their blown glass, their amber art, their urban techniques. And although the Chinese did not adopt them directly, these products inspired new forms of luxury, new ideas of value, and perhaps new technological paths. The exchange was subtle, yet constant. Beyond material goods, the true legacy was cultural. Both empires learned to imagine one another, to recognize each other as advanced civilizations, worthy of respect. That mutual perception, though distorted by myths, traders, and distance, fostered the idea that there were other civilized peoples, as large and complex as their own. And that, in a time when anything foreign was often considered barbaric, was revolutionary. Rome and China never shared a border, but they did share an ambition, to connect beyond their visible limits. And unintentionally, they ended up building one of the first truly global links in human history. Throughout this journey, we have discovered that although separated by thousands of kilometers, the Roman Empire and the Chinese Empire did not live completely isolated from one another. It is true that they never signed formal treaties or established direct diplomatic relations as we understand them today. But that does not mean they were unaware of each other. In fact, what occurred between them was something much more subtle, more complex, and in many ways, more fascinating. Rome desired silk without knowing where it came from. China received Roman objects without knowing exactly who made them. Between them, a network of intermediaries filtered products, stories, and even rumors. Yet, despite all these barriers, each empire knew of the other's existence. Roman poets and geographers spoke of a distant land where that mysterious fiber, seemingly made of light, originated. Chinese chroniclers, in turn, described Liqian, a powerful kingdom located at the far end of the world, with firm laws, impressive cities, and an advanced culture. Although they never met in battle nor sat at the same table, both empires left traces on each other. Not only through trade but also through imagination. They perceived each other as mirror civilizations, distant, different, yet equally grand. And perhaps that was enough to generate mutual respect and curiosity, even without direct contact. Today, when we talk about globalization, cultural exchanges, and commercial networks spanning the globe, we rarely consider that this process began more than 2,000 years ago. But the truth is that silk, glass, amber, coins, and words had already traced routes between East and West long before the world had accurate maps. So next time you feel a soft fabric between your fingers, or see a glass object, remember that these materials, common today, were once treasures that connected worlds. And behind each of them are human stories, traveled paths, risks taken, and shared dreams. So now I ask you, do you think Rome and China would have truly gotten to know each other if there hadn't been so many obstacles along the way? Or perhaps that mystery, that unreachable distance, was precisely what made their bond so lasting? Leave us your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with someone passionate about history's secrets. And if you haven't already, subscribe to continue discovering together the past that remains alive, even if it sometimes hides in the smallest details. Because here, where routes intersect and civilizations brush against one another, we understand that history is not written only in books, but also in what we choose to observe with new eyes.